title of the book, Alone Together, was one of the last things we decided on. The book was in fact a project that started many years ago, and we didn't realize that it was going to turn into a project, or even that it was going to be published into a book. I had started writing poems during the war, the Lebanese war, and I had a very good friend of mine, Aida Haddad, who had gone to live in Greece. She was teaching Arabic there to the Lebanese community. And when my book was published, which was mostly poems about the war and the experience of the war, she sent me back a long letter where she had translated several of my poems to Arabic. And she wrote in that letter, "I have translated you to better understand the work." And I was very touched by that, and I mentioned it to her many years later when I met her in Washington, where she had moved, and we talked about writing, and she told me, I was then working on Balconies, on the manuscript of Balconies, and she said, "You know, I've started translating some of your work in Balconies as well." I said, "Well, when are you going to start writing your own work?" And she said, "Well, actually, I have." And the very next day she came over with a bunch of papers, and we sat and read through them, and the poetry was beautiful. Now, Aida writes in Arabic, so I decided to return the favor, and I translated several of her poems to English, and I found she was right. And when she saw the translation, she said, "This is exactly what I would have said if I could write in English." And that's when the project was born. When we decide to write, we are embarking on a journey. And my life has, in fact, been composed of several journeys. And several journeys that have, in fact, been emigrations and immigrations. As a child of 10 or 11, we had to leave Egypt, which is where I was born, and we came to a Lebanon that I did not know. I left again as a teenager to live in Australia with my family, and that was an emigration from Lebanon. Once in Australia, I found out that I had what they call a crisis of identity, which is a typical adolescent process, but when you're uprooted twice in your life, that makes it a little bit more extreme. I decided in Australia, I realized in Australia that I was predominantly a Lebanese and a Mediterranean. We then came back to Lebanon, just in time for the war. So the theme of identity, I think, is very much present in most of my work. The war is very much a recurrent theme, and the city in time of war. I have fallen in love with Beirut, but it's not it's not a romantic love. I'm not blind to its ugliness. But I have a profound attachment to this place. You know, writing is an urge. You have to put it down and you have to say it. You don't have to share it, but somehow the sharing imposes itself on you sometimes. And I think the dualities of experience, the extremes of being a Lebanese, of living in a city like Beirut, in juggling with the noise, but with the peace at the same time, with the ugliness and with the inherent beauty, with the wires that are, you know, like a jungle out there that meet you everywhere. But yet there are the jacaranda trees and the jasmine trees and the bougainvilleas that are just in full glory. You cannot avoid, you cannot ignore them. You cannot avoid giving them their due. Beirut is also one of the great Levantine cities, and I come from a mixed parentage. My mother is Greek, my father of Lebanese origin. They were both born in Egypt, as was I. So I think this belonging to the world, this being a world citizen, a global citizen, speaking many languages, singing in different languages, praying in different languages, living with people who are different from you and yet so much like you, It's a celebration, and I think maybe my book is an attempt to celebrate life.